January 26, 1953. A television studio in New York City. The air is cold, sterile, electric with pre-show panic. 20 million Americans are tuning in, but Dean Martin only has eyes for one man. A man who isn't on the guest list. A man standing in the shadows just off camera, arms crossed, wearing a suit that costs more than the cameraman's yearly salary. He gives a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The message is clear: don't do it. The stage manager counts down 5-4. Dean Martin smooths his tuxedo lapel, adjusts his cufflinks, and turns to face the blinding eye of the live NBC camera. He is about to break a rule that could get him killed. He is about to say a name that has been erased from the guest list by orders from Chicago. The name of an actress who vanished from Hollywood overnight. The name is Judy, and this is the story they buried. To understand the weight of that silence, you have to go back. You have to feel the Hollywood sun on your back, smell the orange blossoms and the cheap gin, hear the clatter of typewriters manufacturing dreams. It's the late 1940s. Dean Martin isn't Dean Martin yet. He's Dino Crosty from Steubenville, Ohio, a boxer turned singer with a voice like warm bourbon and a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. He's playing second-rate clubs, watching the real players from a distance. And in this town, the real players didn't always wear tuxedos. They wore shadows. They were men with names like Cohen, Siegel, and Gincana. They owned the nightclubs where stars performed, the studios where contracts were signed, the police who looked the other way. The glue between the glitter and the gutter was a simple, unspoken currency: favor for a favor, a sold-out show for a friend, a studio part for an introduction. Dean learned the rules early. You smiled, you shook hands, you never, ever asked what the favor would be later. His rise with Jerry Lewis was a comet streaking across a manufactured sky. The money was insane, the fame was hysterical, the pressure was a slowly tightening vice, and the friends became more permanent fixtures. They'd be in the booth at the Copa laughing a little too loud. They'd send over bottles of champagne with notes that weren't requests. They were reminders. We put you here. Dean would smile that famous smile, raise his glass in their direction, and inside, a cold, quiet part of him would shutter closed. He was building a gilded cage, joke by joke, song by song, and Judy was in the cage next door. Judy was the kind of starlet the studios invented by the dozen. A cascade of honey blonde hair, eyes the color of a studio backlot sky, a laugh that sounded like money. She'd been in a few pictures, nothing major, but she'd caught the eye of someone, not a producer, not a director, a man who owned a piece of a studio, a piece of a casino, a piece of the city. She was seen on his arm at the Trocadero. Photographs were taken, then confiscated. For a fleeting moment, she had the illusion of power, the illusion of choice, and that was her first and fatal mistake. Because in this world, you didn't get to choose when the arrangement was over. He decided. And when Judy, young, foolish, perhaps even in love with someone else, tried to step away, the word came down. Not a lawsuit, not a scandal in the papers, something far more efficient, a whisper. From a powerful agent to every casting director in town: she's difficult, she's unreliable, she's unwell. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations dried up. Her name was scrubbed from the fan magazines. It was a professional erasure so complete, it was as if she'd never existed. Hollywood has always been brilliant at murdering careers without leaving a corpse. Dean knew her not well. They'd shared a bill at a charity event. He'd seen that hollow, frightened look in her eyes at a party, a look he recognized in his own mirror. He heard the whispers about why she'd really disappeared, and it sat in him, a small, hard stone of disgust. But what could he do? He was no hero. He was a comedian in a gilded trap, his own strings being pulled by the same invisible hands. He had a family. He had a partner in Jerry, whose mania was a shield against nothing. He had everything to lose. But then the universe tilted. The Martin and Lewis phenomenon, that beautiful, chaotic, billion-dollar volcano, began to cool. The cracks weren't just professional, they were seismic personal. The laughter in their partnership died, leaving only the echo. And in that newly quiet space, Dean started to hear his own voice again. A voice that wasn't reading a script. A voice that remembered Steubenville, remembered being broke, remembered what it felt like to have no power at all. And he remembered Judy's face. Which brings us to that television studio. The Colgate Comedy Hour, live coast to coast, the most powerful medium on earth. The script was simple. Dean and Jerry would do their shtick. Dean would sing a number, they'd banter with the guest. The guest that week was an up-and-coming singer, a safe choice. But the day before the broadcast, Dean made a call, a quiet, deliberate call to his friend, the newspaper columnist Luella Parsons. He fed her a line, a tidbit about how he was hopping to see old friends in New York, maybe even that sweet kid Judy who'd moved back east. He knew exactly where that whisper would travel. It would hit the wires, land on desks, and eventually find its way to the wrong people. It did, and that's why the man in the expensive suit was in the shadows that night. The message had been delivered to Dean personally, hours before airtime. A friendly visit in his dressing room. Stick to the script, Dino. Don't make things complicated. We all want a good show. The unspoken consequences hung in the air, thicker than cigarette smoke. They weren't just threatening his career. They were threatening the ecosystem of his life, his club dates, his record deals, his physical safety. The old Dean, the one who built his career on a foundation of compromises, would have nodded, smiled, and taken the path of least resistance. But that Dean was gone. The show begins. The chaos of Martin and Lewis unfolds, Jerry's manic squealing, Dean's effortless straight-man grace. The audience is hysterical. But if you watch the kinescope, really watch it, you can see Dean's eyes. They're distant. They keep flicking to the side of the camera, to that spot in the darkness. He's calculating, he's waiting. The musical number ends. The applause dies down. There's a moment of transition, a beat where anything can happen. Jerry is adjusting his bow tie, expecting the next bit of scripted banter. Dean turns to the camera. He doesn't look at Jerry. He doesn't smile. He leans into the microphone, and his voice, usually so smooth, has a deliberate, gravelly weight to it. "You know, it's great being back in New York," he says. The cue cards in front of him say something else entirely. The stage manager's eyes widen. "Ran into an old pal yesterday, just breaks your heart. Remember Judy? Beautiful girl, sang a little, danced a little, had that bit in summer stock." The studio is dead silent. Not a cough, not a rustle of fabric. The air has been sucked out of the room. Jerry Lewis freezes, his comic mask slipping into genuine, open-mouthed confusion. He doesn't know this bit. This isn't a bit. From the darkness, the man in the suit takes a single step forward into the dim edge of the light. His face is a stone. Dean continues, looking directly into the lens, into 20 million living rooms. "She's trying to make a go of it out here, teaching dance. A real class act. And I was thinking this business, it's a tough business. You forget people too easy." He pauses, letting the silence scream. "So, if you're watching, Jude, this one's for you, and don't let the bugs bite." Nods to the orchestra leader, a single off-script downbeat, and Dean Martin begins to sing, not the planned up-tempo number. He sings "You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You," slow, haunting, a dirge wrapped in a love song. Every lyric is a knife. You're nobody till somebody loves you, you're nobody till somebody cares. He's singing to Judy, yes, but he's singing to every forgotten actor, every ruined starlet, every person crushed under the heel of the machine, and he's singing to himself. For 3 minutes, on live national television, Dean Martin conducts a public funeral for Hollywood's code of silence. Aftermath was not explosive, it was glacial, a chilling, quiet freeze. The phone in his hotel room did not ring for 2 days. When it finally did, it was his agent, his voice tight with a fear no contract could articulate. "What did you do, Dino? What in God's name did you do?" Club bookings in certain cities suddenly found scheduling conflicts. A lucrative endorsement deal evaporated. Old friends were no longer seen at his tables. The message was clear: you are now a liability. You have shown you cannot be controlled. But something else happened too, a countercurrent from the shadows of the industry itself. A handwritten note from an old studio head delivered by hand. It took guts. A wave of support from crews, from writers, from actors who'd lived in the same fear, quiet but palpable. They didn't say it aloud, but they communicated it in 100 small ways. A firmer handshake, a longer look in the eye. He had broken the rule and he was still standing. The spell, for a moment, was cracked. For Judy, the gesture was a lifeline that arrived too late. The publicity from Dean's shout-out was immediate and intense, but it was the wrong kind. It marked her forever as that girl, the one with the mob trouble. No legitimate studio would touch her. The notoriety gave her a few nightclub gigs, but the ghost of her past followed her onto every stage. She drifted, eventually leaving the business entirely, marrying a man far from Hollywood, changing her name, trying to vanish for real. Dean's attempt to save her career had, in fact, sealed its fate by etching her scandal in the national consciousness. He had given her back her name, only to have it become a permanent headline of her ruin. The guilt of that unintended consequence would live with him, a private burden he never spoke of. And for Dean, this was the catalyst, the final clean break. The slow dissolution with Jerry Lewis was just the professional manifestation. This was the personal revolution. The man who walked away from the Martin and Lewis juggernaut in 1956 was not the same man who entered it. He was harder, colder, fiercely protective of his autonomy. His subsequent solo success, the iconic albums, the Rat Pack, the film career, was built on a new, unshakable foundation, a profound, quiet understanding of the cost of compromise. He would still play the casinos owned by those same friends. The world wasn't black and white, but the terms were now his. He had stared into the darkness on live TV and hadn't blinked. Nothing would ever scare him in the same way again. Hollywood, of course, moved on. It always does. It smoothed over the cracks, wrote new rules, found new ways to hide its secrets. The incident was never officially reported. There was no press release about Mafia intimidation. The kinescope of that show exists, a spectral record of a rebellion few understood in the moment. If you watch it now, it looks like a simple, slightly awkward ad-lib. You can't see the man in the shadows. You can't feel the terror in the studio. The history books record the end of Martin and Lewis, but they say nothing about the cold January night Dean Martin used his voice, not to sing a love song, but to commit a revolutionary act. Which leaves us with the haunting question, why? Why risk it all for a starlet he barely knew? It wasn't love. It wasn't heroism in the classic sense. It was something more devastating and more human. It was a man, trapped in the pinnacle of success, seeing a reflection of his own captivity in the eyes of another. It was the moment he realized the price of his own smile. And so, on a live broadcast, with nothing but his own nerve as a shield, he decided to pay a different kind of debt. He traded a piece of his safety for a fragment of her dignity. It was a futile, beautiful, catastrophic gesture. It saved no one, and it changed everything. This is the true story they never wanted told, not because it reveals a crime, but because it reveals a truth far more dangerous, that in a town built on illusion, one moment of devastating reality can shake the foundation. This is Hollywood Untold Files. We don't just recount history, we listen for the echoes in the silence. If you're still listening now, you understand why some stories can't stay buried. You understand the cost of a name spoken aloud. Share this with someone who believes that legacy isn't just the roles you played, but the lines you refuse to read. Subscribe and join us as we uncover the next forbidden confession. Because for every star on the Walk of Fame, there's a crack in the pavement where the real story is buried. And in the end, Dean Martin's most powerful performance wasn't in a film or on a stage. It was in a television studio, under a blinding light, when he chose to remember a forgotten girl's name, and in doing so, finally remembered his own.